Hello and welcome to this fifth lesson in our GCSE English Writing Revision Series. If you're sitting the GCSEs this year, next year, the year after, and you're a bit worried about how to write creative writing, transactional writing, which by the way is half your English language GCSE for almost every exam board, this information is going to be really helpful for you. So if you haven't checked out my channel before, over the last 4 weeks, we've been going through character arcs and narrative types, the 5 senses, and something I call FOPPS, flesh and bones, which is the way I recommend that my students plan their answers, both for creative and for transactional, but we went through the creative side of it. And then we did a model answer last week. This is the final week that we'll be looking at creative writing together. We'll be looking at a second model answer, breaking it down. I just figured that it would be good for you to have seen a few high-level answers that you can, get some inspiration from. And then the following weeks, we'll be looking at transactional writing, and we'll be looking at how to put that together, some model answers for that. Okay, so let's dive into model answer 2. So this was written by one of my students a couple of years ago, actually. So she is now, I think, in year 13, and she's about to go to Cambridge, which is quite good for her. Good stuff. I'm glad to see success in my previous students. So I was blown away by this piece when she did it. It was a high level 9, that is to say, basically full marks. But it's very different to the model answer that we looked at last week. So if you haven't checked that one out, highly recommend that as well. We're going to read this and then break it down, talk about what is so good about it, and what you should be trying to emulate from this, basically, in your own piece. And the last thing I'll say, I suppose, which is quite important, is this model answer here is much more based on kind of setting, really. Whereas the model answer last week, it was a little bit more really on character. So you need to use both, but I think that putting an emphasis on character with certain images or scenarios is more valuable. And for other pictures and scenarios, putting a little bit more emphasis on setting might be more valuable. Yeah. So this one is much more on the setting. And but that doesn't mean that there isn't some interesting character work in here too. Okay. Brooklyn. It was a city that never slept. The concrete jungle came alive as the thousands of ostentatious, raindrop-smeared windows on the high-rise buildings looked like a million sparkling diamonds. The neon signs and giant billboards illuminated the streets full of bars and clubs. This really is the city that never sleeps. Yawning, I step out into the crowded streets. Actually, I want to just highlight that. I step out onto the crowded streets, the warmth from the office building evaporating, just like how my will to work today vanished as I got caught in Brooklyn's famous bouts of rain without my umbrella to hand. I had offered to come into work on the weekend to tie up the last few strings on my management assignment. Yet, I was now regretting that fact, as the rain from this building could still be felt chilling my very bones. A sulphurous glow gleamed from the brilliantly lit buildings, illuminating the streets. The benefactor of nightlife reigned supreme like an unstinted birthday cake, imbued with the energy of a whole city. Jovial, ecstatic, energetic, the city was breathing with the soul of a rapturous child. Leisurely, hordes and crowds of tourists sauntered across the road that was engulfed with cascades of cars. I wandered past the busy people, a saline tang of fried, fatty food wafted in the air, mingling with the pungent pollution. The fluorescent lights were blinding, blue and orange, contrasting to the yellow ball of fire on the horizon that changed to hues of orange and then to a deep red. Suddenly, a drop of rain fell from the heavens and landed in front of me. Looking up, to my horror, I saw many clouds, black as night, covering the expanse of the city. Splash. Another raindrop fell. Splash, splash. Another and another. Soon the sky filled with thousands of shards of the coldest water I had ever felt. I went to reach for my umbrella, only to find it not at my side. Damn, I cursed. The world was out to get me today. I quickened my pace, now dodging people racing in the other direction with the skill of a gymnast. I took a shortcut through the park, mud staining my new suit and sticking to my shoes like glue. The rain worsened, and finally I gave up, deciding instead to make shelter under the nearest tree to wait for the worst to pass. I took this time to once again glance at my unfortunate, yet nevertheless beautiful surroundings. The sun was now low in the air, and it merged with the sky, like dye dissolving in a glass of water. The clouds lightened, now instead looking like they were cotton candy, as though they blushed at the warm touch of the sun. Silhouettes of birds flew home across a sky that was now magenta. The sun was half into the water, but its reflection in the sea made it look complete. Drip, drop. I realized now that the rain had passed. Just a shower then, I mused to myself. I carried on pacing, desperate to get home now that my legs were sticking to my suit trousers and every hair on my body was standing on end due to the cold. The mauve of the dusky sky intensified, and in just a while, the biggest star had set, giving way to 1,000 others. Sunset that serenely glowed in the background. The darkness engulfed the last ray of golden hope. As I walked out the park and left only the city lights to keep the inhabitants awake. The departure of the rain brought forth the smell of traffic. Like burnt toast dipped in gasoline, it bled through the streets and into my scrunched up nose. Beyond the horizon, the sun illuminated the shimmering haze of pollution. In the far distance, the silhouette of the skyline pierced through the warm glow like a jagged mountain ridge. Millions of lights caused the dense mass of skyscrapers to glitter. Looking to the distant boulevards, people were needle points and cars were blood, flowing through the veins of the city. Despite the time, the hustle and bustle never came to a halt. Now the sky was in complete darkness, and it seemed like the clouds had gotten a sudden fascination for the moon and wrapped themselves around it. Its faint glow passed through them, colouring them mixtures of white and grey. The faint sound of sirens wailing into the distance, piercing through the silence of the busy people, reminding me of the sharp taste of strangers' watchful, distrusting eyes. The noise intensified, and looking around, I saw the police car race down the busy street, a water-filled pothole in its path. Again, I reached for my umbrella, and yet again, I felt the sense of dread, knowing that it was hung up next to my door in the warmth of my house. Splash. The car sped past, and the water it displaced rose high like a tsunami before promptly falling on my head. I gritted my teeth and kept walking, now fed up with the luck Mother Nature had given me today. The taste of the brisk cold air penetrating my lungs made me feel like the purposeless plastic bag floating above me. Unnoticed, it passed. My home in sight, I ran to the door, already turning the key before I fully got there. The door opened. I went inside, slammed the door behind me and sighed. Slumping against it, I glanced to my left to see my red umbrella hanging on the wall, perfectly dry. Now inside, the warmth of the building flooded through my body. I looked out the window to see a cloudless, rainless sky. Perfect, I whispered sarcastically. If the city wasn't so brightly lit, I would have seen the stars dotted about like a midnight dress, full of precious stones, drifting across the heavens. This would be the weekend that would remind me to never, ever forget my umbrella. Okay, so that's the piece. It's a longer piece than last week's piece. I think in total it's probably slightly longer than I would expect most students. No, it's 1,000 words. It's just shy of 1,000 words. So this really is achievable within the time frame that you will have in your exam, because for most of you, you're given between 45 minutes and an hour to write a piece. So, it's a well-planned piece. I hope that as we read it, you were sort of seeing the imagery that she has used, because there's a lot of really great imagery in here. So yeah, let's just talk about it and think about what we can get out of it, really. So in terms of characterization, let's start with character. We have this sense of a lady who has basically left without her umbrella to go to work. It doesn't look like it's going to be a cloudy, rainy day, and yet for some reason it's almost as if the weather is out to get her. And then there's the irony at the end of the fact that she's soaking wet, but her umbrella is dry. And the fact that as she gets into her home, she looks out and all the clouds and rain seems to have dispersed. So the character is sort of played with by the elements in some way. And we get a little bit of a sense of her character as well. She's the narrator of the piece because it's all written in first person from her perspective. So that's how we get to know. It's a linear piece. It's a linear narrative. So it starts at the beginning and it ends at the end, and it goes chronologically. It doesn't have any skips or flashbacks or flash forwards. And that that makes it very immersive to read as well. Like it's just this kind of window into her life for an afternoon, and then we carry on our separate ways. But the major triumph of the piece is not as much the character, even though the character is really good. It's the setting, right? That's what I really want you to get out of today's session, is just look at the way she's used imagery and similes and metaphors and the five senses. And she's used irony, like I mentioned, and she's used all kinds of colors and just very immersive piece. So her vocab is also just top tier, right? So use words like ostentatious, that is fantastic. And use words like benefactor. These are unusual word choices for a GCSE student. So if you don't already have a word of the day app or some similar way of like building your vocab, especially if you're doing the exams this year, get something, download an app on your phone, totally free, read a bit more, push yourself to look up definitions of words in things you read that you don't know, use a dictionary, use your phone, just build your vocab a bit. She's done this with words, verbs and actions as well. So sauntered, fantastic word. There were several others, but yeah, vocab has been pushed really, really hard here. So the other thing that's interesting is the way that the setting is alive in some sense, right? So a lot of students, what they'll do is they'll create a backdrop or a setting and then they'll not mention it again. That's okay. That's not a bad strategy depending on the story. But the fact that the raindrop smeared windows look like a million sparkling diamonds at the beginning, really positive imagery about the rain and the raindrop smears, right? And it's just funny because we get that at the beginning, and then she obviously is like battling with the rain and it's freezing her on the streets. And so there's this development. It's like the weather within the setting is actually another character, and it's really the antagonist of the piece, right? It's really the enemy of the protagonist, the lady in the piece. This is a perfectly solid simile. There's nothing majorly special about it. I would say it's fairly cliche, that a million sparkling diamonds, the rain, but it's a good simile. It works. Then there's this, I love this line: the city never sleeps. Yawning, I step out into the crowded streets. Now that's very subtle, but it's actually very clever. So the fact that the city never sleeps, and then the very next word is her yawning. Obviously, you often yawn when you've just gotten up from sleep. So it shows that she juxtaposes the city, right? She maybe in some ways doesn't fully belong here, or there's like this contrast between her and her city. So using little ironies like that, or using little contrasts like that, is really, really good. And I just love that. Chilling my very bones. So this is sensory imagery. Try and use all of the five senses. So this is the sense of touch, and it's vivid imagery as well. The idea that the cold is getting to her bones generates a lot of pathos. She's used semicolon here. I would say that most of this piece is also well paced. So there are these bits where the pace is really slow, especially with the tension of the oncoming rain. And then when she's running away from the rain and things like that, it gets faster. But she's used very well some of these punctuations to really slow things down at key moments. So the glow of the buildings illuminating the streets, that little semicolon there just slows the pace for a second and allows us to emphasize the beauty of the city at the beginning. And remember, this is before the rain. So the city is really beautiful and it's immersive. So don't forget your punctuation and don't forget to vary it. Okay. Sometimes you can use some alliteration. Again, quite a simple thing technically, yet quite difficult to use well. So I'm really impressed with the saline tang of fried fatty food wafted in the air. So those F sounds, the alliteration or sibilance of those F sounds is this just vivid moment of the sense of smell. And so she's not just focusing on what she sees or what she feels or what she hears, she's also doing what she smells. She's using all of these senses really well. And then this is one of my favorite bits of the whole piece. The yellow ball of fire changed to hues of orange and then to deep red. So there is this passage of time, and it's used through the imagery of the sun. So obviously the sun, when it's fully in the sky, is kind of the brightest it is, like often the yellowest it looks. And then as it comes down and starts to set, the same as when it comes up and starts to rise, it gets darker and more orangey. And then we've all seen, hopefully, the beauty of that final bit of sunrise, where the yellow sun of the height of the sky is now almost like a red or deep orange kind of color as it finally descends for the night, or finally starts to ascend for the morning. So I just love that passage of time. Try and think of ways of using certain objects to show the passage of time. So, you can use anything. So I've got a glass of water on my desk right now, right? So you could use the passage of time, like maybe in the beginning, the water glass is all the way full. Maybe in the middle, it's half full. I'm a half full kind of guy, not a half empty kind of guy. And then at the end, maybe it's empty. So something as simple and delicate as a glass of water can be used really well for the passage of time. Yeah. So think about what you would like to do that. I'm going to have a sip of this now. Okay. So passage of time through some sort of symbol, really good idea. Then we've got some interesting similes and personification. This makes the city seem more alive. So the clouds were like cotton candy. So we get this sense that in this interlude where the rain stops for a while, the clouds look beautiful and soft and almost sweet and inviting. And then they're blushing through the sun. So this personifies them. It suggests that the clouds are kind of a bit shy and sweet and just cute and innocent. And again, she's doing this, I think, to give more of a character and a life to the setting. But that then makes the fact that the clouds then get vicious again and start pouring down with rain again more interesting and intense for the reader. She's used a little bit of onomatopoeia as well, drip, drip, and splash, splash, that sort of thing. That's a nice little technique to add in where you can. A little bit of onomatopoeia never hurt anyone. Makes it a bit more direct for a second. I like that. The biggest star had set, giving away to 1,000 others. You've just got this nice juxtaposition of the biggest star obviously being the sun, at least in terms of our planet, it's the biggest star. And then giving way to thousands of others. Obviously, these are all the little stars in the night sky. So again, passage of time, the sun setting and then the stars coming and twinkling out. Then we've got some disgusting imagery. The idea that the smell of traffic was like burnt toast dipped in gasoline and it bled through the streets. So be careful with your verb choices. Try and make sure that your verb choices match what you're trying to do. If you're trying to do something positive, use more positive verbs. If you're trying to do something more negative or disgusting, use more negative or disgusting verbs. So the idea that the smell bleeds through the streets, it's a very disgusting image. It's not appealing at all. Again, it's our sense of smell. But what I really liked about this as well is we get the sense of smell and then we get her reaction to it. So rather than just saying, there's a disgusting smell, have your character interact with it or have the character do something that shows an interaction. That's really engaging for us as readers. And then we've got the extension of this figurative language. The cars were blood flowing through the veins of the city. So the pollution, the smell of the traffic is described as bleeding through the streets. And then she extends it out and says the cars were blood. So obviously all of the blood, the pollution is coming from the cars. But the cars are also essential because they're the veins of the city. So you've got this weird mingling of they're kind of disgusting and a pain and a nuisance and smelling and pollution, but at the same time, they're also necessary to the city. So you've got what she's done well with the setting a lot of the time is she's used these dichotomies or divisions, right? Couple more things. I think I've already mentioned the perfectly dry. So there's this irony that the umbrella is perfectly dry. I love the ending of the piece. This would be the weekend to remind me that to never ever forget my umbrella. So the prompt, I didn't tell you this, but the prompt that she had for the scenario was talk about a memorable day or a memorable weekend. So, most students, they would write about like going to a foreign country or like maybe a sibling or friend, something to do with like a big event with the family or, like some big thing. What she's done, which I love, is she's actually taken like just a normal everyday day, kind of a bad day, and said, well, this is a significant day because it reminds me, never forget your umbrella. So it ends with this little bit of humor. But yes, the irony that the umbrella is perfectly dry. Obviously, the whole point of an umbrella is that it gets wet so you don't have to. And also just running to the door, already turning the key before I fully even got there. So that's a nice little image, a moment. You can imagine the desperation, just trying to get into her apartment. She doesn't want to deal with it anymore. So yeah, I think hopefully you've got a few things out of looking at that with me. If nothing else, hopefully it's inspiration of how to write about setting. Loads of good things. So let's just recap. Push your vocab, push your verb choices, try to use a diverse range of images and the five senses as well. Use an object, maybe something as simple as a glass of water, to convey the passage of time if there is a time shift. Yeah, and just try and make your character immersed in the setting. Try and have the character react to things in the setting. Doesn't have to take a lot of time within your writing, but even just the scrunched up nose at the disgusting smell just makes it that little bit more real, a little bit more vivid, that little bit more engaging. So yeah, I think that's all we've got time for today, really, for model answer 2. If you like the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you have any questions or comments, please do comment or question down below. Next week, as I said, we're going to start some transactional writing. So yeah, check out the other videos in the series if you haven't, and I will see you in the next one. Thanks.